Two names, one lie. In a congressional hearing broadcast across the nation, Jasmine Crockett confronts Kash Patel over a secret communications network designed to erase government accountability. Patel denies everything until Jasmine presents evidence so damning he can't even speak. His reputation crumbles. The public turns. But as the footage goes viral, one question echoes everywhere. What did Jasmine say that made Kash Patel vanish overnight? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. Rain tapped against the Capitol windows as if warning that something big was about to break. Inside room 2141 of the Rayburn House building, everything looked like a normal government hearing. Staffers moved quickly, reporters adjusted their cameras, and no one expected anything special. But Jasmine Crockett knew better. For months, she had been following a disturbing trail. Evidence suggesting that powerful officials had been using a private, off-the-record communication system to hide serious mistakes inside national security reports. Emails were rerouted through personal accounts. Sensitive updates were passed through encrypted apps. And key decisions that should have been logged, reviewed, and made public, were deliberately kept off the radar to avoid congressional oversight, dodge FOIA requests, and bury government failures that could have cost lives. Jasmine stood silently, gripping a leather folder that held everything she had found. At the center of it all was one man, Kash Patel. Patel, once a powerful figure under the Trump administration, was a master at avoiding blame. He used burner phones, encrypted messages, and private servers to cover his tracks. He thought it all had been deleted. He thought no one would ever find it. But Jasmine had. She had followed every breadcrumb, every digital footprint, every suspicious timestamp, and pieced it together. But she hadn't revealed anything yet. She needed the perfect moment, when Patel was under oath, in public, with the cameras rolling. Today wasn't about asking questions. It was about exposing everything in front of the world. As Patel walked in, calm and confident, Jasmine didn't even look at him. She looked at the empty chair where he would soon sit, unaware that she was about to corner him with something he couldn't talk his way out of. This wasn't about politics. It was about justice. For every staffer who was told to stay quiet, for every report that was edited or deleted. This hearing was the moment the silence would break. And when it did, the lie Patel had built over years would collapse in minutes, on live television, and under Jasmine Crockett's steady voice. But when the gavel dropped and Patel leaned into his microphone for the first time, Jasmine didn't see a man in control. She saw a man walking straight into a trap with no idea the floor beneath him was already cracking. The first 15 minutes felt uneventful to almost everyone in the room. Jasmine's questions were calm, factual, even dull to the untrained ear. She asked about calendar dates, routine emails, coordination meetings that seemed insignificant. There were no accusations, no raised eyebrows, no tension in her tone. Patel responded smoothly, sitting comfortably with one arm resting on the desk, answering each prompt like a man who knew the answers before they were asked. He used just enough detail to sound helpful, but never enough to give anything away. To most people in the chamber, it felt like watching two people read from a very dry script. But beneath that surface, a different story was unfolding. Jasmine wasn't asking to learn. She was asking to confirm. She already knew the answers. What she was watching for were the cracks, not in the content, but in the performance. Every time Patel paused before a specific date, she made a mark. Every time he looked to his lawyer before responding, she noted the time code. And when he smiled that half-second too long at a question he assumed was beneath him, she knew he was settling into a false sense of control. That's when she shifted. Without changing tone, without warning, she pivoted from observation to execution. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even lift her head. She simply slid a page from her folder, held it gently in both hands, and said, "Mr. Patel, can you confirm that you testified under oath that you had no written communication regarding the March 14th security briefing?" He nodded confidently. "That's correct." Jasmine nodded too, then calmly unfolded the paper and held it up. "Then can you explain this?" In her hands was a memo dated March 13th, sent from Patel's personal email account to another encrypted private inbox. It referenced the March 14th briefing by name, with detailed notes about its contents, attendees, and classified focus points. The metadata was intact. The signature block at the bottom was Patel's. Not a forwarded note, not a staff-generated draft. His. And in that moment, the shift in the room was palpable. The rustling stopped. A staffer from across the aisle slowly lowered his pen. One of the reporters glanced up, then stood. Two committee members who had been checking their phones now stared straight ahead. The atmosphere thickened, like oxygen itself had paused to listen. Even Patel's attorney subtly adjusted his position, suddenly less relaxed. This was no longer a procedural formality. This wasn't a series of harmless inquiries. It was a countdown, and Jasmine had just reached 0. For the first time, Kash Patel blinked. The edges of his confidence began to peel back, not with panic, but with a question that echoed silently in his mind. Where did she get that? And Jasmine, though saying nothing, had already answered it with her silence. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to accuse. All she had to do was hold the truth up like a mirror and let the world watch him see it for the first time. But Jasmine wasn't done. Not even close. She had only pulled the first thread. Now she was ready to unravel the whole fabric. She reached for a small black remote, one that had sat untouched at her side for the last 30 minutes, and turned slowly to the mounted screen behind the committee desk. Her voice didn't rise. She didn't preface it with a speech or dramatics. She simply said, "Let's take a look at this footage," and pressed play. The screen flickered to life with grayscale surveillance video. The timestamp appeared immediately. March 13th, 2:13 a.m. A dimly lit hallway, a badge scanner blinked. Then a man appeared. Trim suit, quick steps, lanyard swaying. The camera angle was fixed, but clear enough to recognize the man as a member of Patel's own staff. He approached a locked cabinet, typed in a code with practiced confidence, plugged in a small external drive, and printed exactly 3 sheets of paper. No hesitation, no delay. Then he collected the pages and walked out, leaving no digital trace on the standard system. No one in the room spoke. It was the kind of silence that didn't just land, it pressed. Aides stopped writing, phones were lowered. Even Patel's lawyer leaned forward with the slow realization that they had stepped into something far more serious than expected. Jasmine didn't explain the footage. She didn't need to. She let it loop again. The movements, the timestamp, the location, it all played like a silent confession, the kind that doesn't need words, only eyes. Jasmine watched the replay without flinching, her posture unmoved, her face unreadable. For a woman who had been dismissed for months, called paranoid, overreaching, even unprofessional, this wasn't vindication. It was preparation. She was just getting started. Still facing forward, Jasmine picked up a new document from her folder and placed it gently on the desk in front of her. The weight in her voice returned, not louder, but firmer, like a lock sliding into place. "This," she said, tapping it once, "is the server access log." She slid it across the table to the chairman, careful and deliberate, never once breaking her rhythm. "It confirms that the document you claim not to have authored was sent from a private server registered under your name." Her fingers turned the page like a courtroom exhibit. "The IP address matches login activity from your home Wi-Fi network on March 13th at 11:42 p.m. Then finally, her eyes moved, directly to Patel. "That's 90 minutes before your aide printed the document. Would you like to explain that sequence?" Patel didn't answer. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. The color in his face had shifted just enough for the cameras to catch it. Jasmine sat back, hands folded. Not triumphant, not smug, just patient. She wasn't rushing this. She had spent 3 months being dismissed, ignored, and cautioned not to push too hard. But this was the moment all of that reversed. And now it was Patel who had to explain. Not her. The trap was no longer theoretical. It had snapped shut. And Patel, still trying to smile through it, hadn't realized he was already bleeding credibility. He leaned forward slightly, just enough to project composure, but not enough to hide the shift in his breathing. "That memo," he said carefully, almost rehearsed, "was an internal draft. It was never finalized. It was never sent." His voice held a tone of strained authority. the kind used by men accustomed to being believed simply because they spoke calmly. Around him, subtle glances were exchanged. One committee member frowned, another paused mid-note. To Patel, it still felt like he might steer this back under control. But across the room, Jasmine Crockett was already unfolding a sheet of paper. She didn't raise it dramatically. She didn't grandstand. She simply placed it on the table between them with the quiet certainty of someone who had verified it 10 times. "We have confirmation," she said steadily, "that the memo was transmitted via secure channel to an encrypted address associated with Mr. Devlin's office at 12:07 a.m., March 14th. Her words landed with surgical precision. No wasted syllables, no hesitation. She let the timestamp settle like a slow drumbeat. The file hash matches the copy printed at 2:13 a.m. It was sent, it was received, and we have a red receipt." There was no drama in her tone, just a quiet gravity that made the room feel smaller, heavier. For a second, nothing moved, until Patel's hands, resting on the table, tensed ever so slightly, fingers curling as if trying to hold on to a version of the truth that was slipping from his grasp. His lawyer leaned in, whispering fast, low words into his ear, but Patel didn't answer. His eyes locked onto the paper Jasmine had placed down, as if staring long enough might undo its contents. But it was too late. The damage wasn't in the document. It was in the lie that had just been spoken aloud, now exposed, and the room felt it. Everyone in that chamber, staffers, journalists, even rival committee members, understood what they were witnessing. This wasn't a misstatement. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a direct contradiction between sworn testimony and cold digital evidence. Jasmine had walked through fire to get here. Months of being ignored, stonewalled, warned that she was wasting her time. And yet here she was, one line of code at a time, dismantling a defense built on arrogance and false confidence. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply waited. And in that waiting, the balance of power shifted, not with force, but with facts, one undeniable sentence at a time. But the deeper Jasmine went, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about what Patel had done. It was about how far he was willing to go to pretend it never happened. She didn't pause to dramatize the moment. There was no grand speech, no flourish. Just a single motion, quiet, deliberate, as she reached for a page tucked beneath the rest. The room had settled into a strange electric silence where the softest gesture carried weight. Jasmine pulled out the document like someone unlocking the next layer of a puzzle. No one else in the room had realized they were inside. With a simple tap of her finger on the control beside her, the screen behind the witness table lit up. No memo, no form, just a screenshot, sharp, dark background, white font, a private encrypted message thread. One line, short and chilling in its bluntness. "Off the radar, clean, no trace." She let it hang there, glowing behind her, and for a full 2 seconds she said nothing. The audience shifted. An intern near the back stood taller. A committee member lowered his glasses to reread the phrase. Then Jasmine read it aloud, slowly, clearly, syllable by syllable, so that the record would never mistake the words. And then she lifted her eyes. Her gaze locked on Patel like a laser. There was no emotion in it, no anger, no glee, only clarity. "You call that an internal directive, Mr. Patel?" The moment froze. Across the room, even the most cynical observers began to sense it. This wasn't posturing, and it wasn't political theater. It was the moment a wall cracked. Patel's reaction wasn't immediate. His lips parted, but no sound came. His eyes darted, not in panic, but in the reflex of someone trying to reassemble a script that had just been shattered. He looked at the screen again, as if hoping the words had changed, as if the pixels might offer him an escape. They didn't. He straightened slightly, but his posture was no longer confident. It was rigid, defensive. And then came the snap. The carefully rehearsed restraint he'd worn like armor gave way, and his voice rose with heat. "This is a political performance," he barked, the tone sharper than anything he'd said all morning. "You're twisting informal messages to fit a headline." He hit the table, not loud enough to be a threat, but loud enough to demand attention. His shoulders rolled forward, eyes hard, teeth clenched as he leaned in, like a man still trying to fight for a corner that no longer existed. But Jasmine didn't move. She didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Her hands were still calmly folded on the desk, as though she had been expecting this exact outburst, as though she had written it into the script he didn't know he was following. She waited, gave him the rope, and then quietly she pulled. "We're not here for headlines, Mr. Patel," she said in a voice so steady it felt colder than any shout could have been. "We're here because under oath you denied this message existed." That sentence didn't just sit on the air. It tightened it. For the people watching live, for those glued to screens across the country, the line hit like a gavel of its own. It was the moment the narrative turned, not because she had exposed new evidence, but because she had exposed the lie that tried to erase it. Across the dais, Chairman Dupont had heard enough. His voice, when it came, was sharp and final. His gavel struck the desk with a crack that seemed to ripple across the floor. "Order," he said, leaning forward, tone firm. "Mr. Patel, I remind you that perjury before this committee is a federal crime. You may respond calmly, or you may invoke counsel." There it was, the line between defense and self-destruction, spoken aloud before the entire country. And in that instant, Patel, who had once advised secretaries of defense and whispered into the highest offices in the land, looked suddenly smaller. His breathing had quickened. His fingers fidgeted near his lapel. His mouth opened but didn't move into words. The silence that followed wasn't neutral. It was damning. And Jasmine? She didn't smile. She didn't show triumph. She just sat still. A woman who had carried months of disbelief, of private warnings to let it go, of closed-door mockery that said, "You'll never prove it." She had proved it. With 4 words on a black screen and a single question under oath, she had changed the entire hearing. The cameras didn't need to zoom in. Her stillness said everything. And beneath that stillness, a truth echoed. She wasn't there to perform. She was there to expose. And now the only performance left was Patel's unraveling. Just when it seemed the room had reached its breaking point, the door opened, and with it came a witness no one had expected, carrying truths no one could ignore. The doors at the back of the chamber opened with a slow creak that made more than one head turn, not because of volume, but because of timing. It didn't sound like a mistake. It sounded like a shift, a disruption, the kind of moment people feel in their chest before they understand it in their head. A figure stepped through, a woman, early to mid-30s, plain gray jacket, dark slacks, and a folder clutched tightly in both hands. No media pass, no staffer escort, no expression that sought attention. She walked slowly but with purpose, eyes fixed forward. There was something in her posture, not confidence, not fear, but a kind of quiet resolve that said she had waited long enough. At the table, Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. She stood as if on cue, turning toward the chairman. "Mr. Chairman," she said, her voice controlled but charged, "with your permission, I'd like to introduce a supplemental witness." It was the kind of request that usually triggered procedural debates, paperwork, and at least one stern objection. But none came. The chairman looked at the woman now standing quietly by the side aisle, then back at Jasmine, and gave a single, deliberate nod. "Proceed," he said. The woman stepped forward. For a moment, the room seemed to narrow around her. She passed row after row of staffers, cameras, committee members, as if walking through layers of history and consequence. She took her seat, laid the folder flat on the witness table, and looked directly at the clerk who approached with the oath. Her voice was steady when she spoke. "Melinda Kash, former executive assistant to Mr. Patel." The silence that followed wasn't just respectful, it was heavy. The kind of silence that suggested something sacred was about to be broken. Jasmine leaned in. "Ms. Kash, did you participate in the preparation or handling of communication materials related to the March 14th briefing?" Melinda didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said, her voice calm and unshaken. "I printed 2 versions of the memo, one for official archiving, one for encrypted distribution. The second was renamed, repackaged, and routed through a secure line marked W staff line." She paused briefly as if choosing whether to go on. Afterwards, I was instructed to delete my name from all metadata fields and internal logs. The room reacted not with noise, but with a collective intake of breath. Quiet, but unmistakable. Somewhere in the second row, a reporter's pen froze mid-sentence. One of the aides to a Republican committee member looked up from his phone for the first time in 20 minutes. At the witness table, Patel's lawyer straightened visibly, brows furrowing, whispering something rapid and sharp. Patel didn't look at anyone. He just stared straight ahead. Jasmine's voice broke the tension like a scalpel. "Who gave that instruction?" Melinda's answer was a bullet wrapped in linen. "Mr. Patel." There was no anger in her tone, no vengeance. It was just a statement of fact, and that made it hit harder. She opened the folder, slowly, carefully, like someone handling evidence at a crime scene. One by one, she pulled out printed system logs, time-stamped server entries, and outbound email headers. She laid them out side by side like puzzle pieces returning to their original shape. Jasmine didn't interrupt. She just let the paper do the talking. But then Melinda spoke again, softer this time, but more dangerous. "The last document I kept was this." She held up a page with no government seal, no letterhead. Just a title at the top. Operational Contingency Workflow, W Staff Protocols. The text beneath it was clean, clinical, almost surgical, a checklist for digital erasure. How to structure plausible deniability, how to mask authorship across devices, how to bounce encrypted messages through third-party proxy servers. It wasn't classified. It wasn't even marked. That's what made it brilliant and terrifying. "We called it the playbook," Melinda said. "Not officially. It wasn't labeled that. But everyone who worked in that room knew what it was. It was how you erased footprints without leaving the hallway." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't shake. She simply placed the page on the table and slid it across to Jasmine. "I didn't keep copies, but I kept this one. Because I knew someday someone would come asking for the truth. And now someone had." The room held its breath. Outside the chamber, people watching live feeds leaned forward in their chairs. Inside, you could hear the faint mechanical hum of a camera adjusting focus. Jasmine didn't say anything for a few seconds. She just looked down at the document as if it were not a piece of paper, but a key. And then she looked up. Not at Melinda, not even at Patel, but straight at the American people watching behind every screen. She didn't need to say it aloud. The message was already clear. They hadn't just uncovered a lie. They had uncovered a system built to lie. Melinda's testimony had cracked the surface, but what came next didn't just break it. It collapsed the floor entirely beneath Kash Patel's feet. He sat there, visibly smaller than when he entered, fingers pressed tightly together as if trying to grip the version of reality that was slipping between his hands. The silence that followed Melinda's last sentence hung like fog, thick, unmoving. Everyone was watching him now. Even those who had doubted Jasmine were leaning forward, sensing something irreversible was about to happen. Patel swallowed once, then again. His voice when it came was different. Lower, slower, stripped of the casual arrogance he wore like armor. "There was a framework," he said. He didn't look at anyone. "Some people called it a playbook. Not officially. It wasn't written in one place, but yes, it existed." He paused as if waiting for someone to rescue him. No one did. Not his attorney, not the chairman, certainly not Jasmine. "And how many people were involved?" she asked, her tone so even it almost masked the blade beneath. Patel hesitated, then exhaled sharply through his nose. "At least 5, he said. "Probably more." "I wasn't the only one." The room felt like it contracted. Phones were forgotten. Pens stopped. It wasn't just the number. It was the way he said it. "To protect strategic information," he added quickly, like a man trying to repaint the meaning of the confession he just made. Not to cover anything up, just to shield it from unnecessary exposure. Jasmine leaned in slowly, elbows resting on the desk, her fingers laced together in a way that was deliberate, patient, and unmistakably controlled. "Shield it," she repeated, voice like quiet thunder. "From whom, Mr. Patel? From Congress? From oversight committees? From the American people?" Patel didn't answer. His eyes dropped to the table. The line of his jaw tightened again, but no words came out. She gave him 5 seconds, long enough to offer him the dignity of silence, and then she went further. "Who created the protocols?" she asked. Again, silence. This time Jasmine didn't wait. She picked up a small note card. Her voice didn't rise, but the moment did. "Was it Devlin?" That name, just one word, cut through the room like a fault line. Even those unfamiliar with inner Washington circles recognized the shift. The staffers near the back sat forward. A veteran journalist whispered, "Oh my God," to no one in particular. One of the committee members, previously stone-faced, blinked twice. The entire chamber seemed to hold its breath. Patel didn't confirm, but he didn't deny, and that was louder than any answer. Jasmine pressed the silence further, not by naming more names, but by exposing the architecture. "Let the record show," she said slowly, "that this was never about one person or one memo. This isn't a rogue staffer moment. It's not some misunderstanding of procedure." She lifted a document, the playbook again, and tapped it lightly. "What we've uncovered here is not disorganization. It is coordination, not accident, but design. A deliberate system meant to move sensitive actions out of traceable reach, built not to protect the country, but to protect the people inside it from the consequences of their own choices." Her words didn't echo because of volume. They echoed because the room had gone silent around them. Patel shifted again, finally breaking eye contact with the paper in front of him. But he didn't look up. His shoulders rose in the faintest motion, defensive, resigned, trapped. Jasmine didn't stop there. How many agencies received instructions based on this playbook? How many decisions were made without record? How many warnings were buried under the guise of operational security when they were really about political survival? No answer came. She didn't expect one. Instead, she sat back, finally letting the room breathe. And in that breath, the power shifted. Completely. Because now it wasn't about Patel. It wasn't even about Devlin. It was about the structure, the machinery, the blueprint that made it all possible. The quiet culture of avoidance that had been normalized at the highest levels of decision-making. And most of all, it was about the cost, to truth, to accountability, to the people who trusted the system to function in daylight, not shadows. And in that moment, watching from their phones in break rooms, from laptops in college dorms, and from old TVs in living rooms across the country, people didn't just see a hearing. They saw the curtain pulled back, and they understood. This wasn't just a man in trouble. This was a system exposed. But as the silence deepened, and the weight of what had been revealed settled like ash on every surface, it became clear. This was no longer just a hearing. It was a reckoning. Chairman DuPont looked up slowly from the stack of documents in front of him, glasses perched low on his nose. His fingers tapped twice on the edge of his gavel, a soft warning that the room was about to shift once more. "This committee," he said, voice even but taut with underlying pressure, "is now at a procedural crossroads." He paused, scanning the room. No one spoke. No one dared to interrupt the tension. Given the gravity of the evidence presented, particularly the confirmed existence of an off-the-books protocol, potential perjury, and systemic avoidance of congressional oversight, this chamber will now entertain a motion for emergency vote. The sentence dropped like a stone. Eyes widened. One staffer near the back stood up instinctively, then sat back down as if realizing no movement could soften what was about to unfold. DuPont continued, "The motion is this: to determine whether the House Committee on National Security will formally refer all documentation, witness testimony, and findings from today's hearing to the Department of Justice for criminal investigation and possible prosecution." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The mere mention of DOJ electrified the room. Suddenly, every angle of every camera sharpened. Reporters stopped typing summaries and started recording again. On screens across America, news anchors paused mid-sentence as alerts lit up in studio control rooms. "Live vote underway. DOJ referral imminent." Jasmine said nothing. She sat still, her hands folded, her breathing steady. But inside, she knew exactly what this meant. It was no longer about proving Patel lied. It was about whether the system, so skilled at self-protection, would actually let one of its own be held accountable. She had fought months just to be heard. Now justice rested in a vote she couldn't cast herself. Chairman Dupont called the roll. One by one, members responded. Aye, aye, nay, aye. The words came slowly, each one a strike of thunder on the floor. Every name called was a pivot point. Some looked at Patel before responding. Some looked at Jasmine. Some didn't look up at all. When the final tally was complete, Dupont lowered his glasses, checked the count again, and raised his gavel. His voice rang with gravity. By a vote of 11-2, he announced, this committee will refer all materials from this proceeding to the Department of Justice for immediate federal investigation. This hearing is now adjourned, pending legal review. The moment didn't explode. It detonated. Gasps echoed from every corner. Patel's lawyer dropped his pen. One reporter mouthed the words, "Oh my God," as she ripped her earpiece out and ran from the room. A staffer behind the press table began crying, quietly but not from sorrow, from release, from the knowledge that someone had finally broken through. And Jasmine, she didn't celebrate. She didn't smile. She just closed her eyes for a brief second, as if giving herself permission to finally exhale. This wasn't triumph. It was vindication soaked in exhaustion. For months, she had been warned to back off, told to stop pushing, that there were rules unwritten, lines uncrossable, people untouchable. But now the gavel had dropped, and the sound wasn't just procedural. It was historic. Outside the chamber, the world ignited. Within minutes, the hashtag Playbook Leaks began trending globally. On TikTok, clips of Jasmine reading the phrase, "Off the radar, clean, no trace," looped with dramatic soundtracks and captions like, "She didn't flinch." Twitter exploded with side-by-side comparisons of Patel's denials and the receipts Jasmine had laid out like dominoes. On Reddit, a thread titled, "Patel's Playbook is Real, and so is the Fallout," had over 10,000 upvotes in under 20 minutes. CNN switched to non-stop live coverage. MSNBC cut into a scheduled presidential town hall. Even Fox News, visibly cautious, broke from regular programming to confirm the DOJ referral. Outside, camera crews flooded the Capitol steps. Protesters who had gathered quietly through the morning now began to chant, not in outrage but in defiant clarity. No more silence. No more shadow rules. Across the country, classrooms paused civics lessons to stream the hearing's final moments. A high school government teacher in Atlanta told her students, "You're watching history." In a nursing home in Cleveland, a retired federal prosecutor turned to his caregiver and whispered, "I've waited 40 years for someone like her." In a newsroom in Los Angeles, a young journalist began drafting an op-ed titled, "Crockett didn't just confront power. She dismantled its illusion." And inside the chamber, even as most members gathered their papers, Jasmine stayed seated. Brenda, her aide, leaned close, whispering something urgent. But Jasmine's eyes remained fixed on the nameplate in front of her. It read Kash Patel. But after today, that name would be remembered differently. Not as a staffer, not as a strategist, but as the man whose playbook got dragged into the daylight and burned. Because for every shadow tactic, every encrypted message, every whisper behind closed doors, Jasmine had found the light. She didn't win by shouting. She won by showing, line by line, fact by fact. And now the full weight of the American justice system was finally moving. Not against opinion, but against action. No one in that room would forget what they had witnessed, and no one watching would ever again believe that the system couldn't be challenged. Because today it was, and it blinked, and it backed down. The vote had ended, the gavel had dropped, but the battle hadn't. Jasmine had cracked open the door to the truth, and now the world was rushing through it, torch in hand. Within hours of the DOJ referral, a 37-second clip ripped across the internet like wildfire. The moment was simple, sharp, and devastating. Jasmine Crockett, sitting steady beneath fluorescent lights, had leaned forward and delivered a single question to Kash Patel, her voice low but cutting. "You think no one checks?" That sentence, spoken without venom, had detonated with more force than any shout. On Twitter, the clip was posted and reposted with the caption, "The moment the whole room stopped breathing." TikTok users stitched it with their own stunned reactions, some in silence, some whispering. She said what we were all thinking. YouTube channels clipped it into political compilations titled things like Jasmine versus The Machine, or What Happens When You Prepare for the Truth. The hashtags exploded in real time. Playbook leaks, Crockett checks, no one checks became a slogan, scrawled in Sharpie on protest signs, burned into headlines, and added as bio taglines by tech whistleblowers and angry interns across Washington. For once, the attention wasn't on spectacle, it was on silence. The kind of silence that follows a fact so blunt and so undeniable, it leaves even the guilty unsure what to do next. But then, something stranger happened. At precisely 1:19 a.m. Eastern, an anonymous X account under the name Echo Ren made a post that stopped a million thumbs in mid-scroll. The message was plain. White text on black background. We know who W staff line is. If DOJ won't name them, we will. You have 48 hours. The post disappeared 3 minutes later, but the screenshots were already everywhere. Echo Ren wasn't a meme account or a troll page. It was a name spoken in low tones across encrypted signal groups, known to cybersecurity analysts, privacy journalists, and former contractors who'd worked in gray zones. No one knew who ran it. Some claimed it was a network. Others said it was one person, a data forensics savant who'd once uncovered illegal surveillance at a private defense firm and made all 6,000 pages public. One tech journalist called them what Snowden would have become if he'd never gone to Moscow. Another called them the ghost DOJ fears. And now they were watching Jasmine Crockett's hearing. The pressure shifted again, no longer just inside the government, but outside too. A kind of public reckoning with secrets that had finally been dragged into the open. By sunrise, major cable shows couldn't ignore it. CNN ran a 2-hour segment, Who is W Staff Line? MSNBC pulled up archived documents showing encrypted servers registered to blind corporations in Delaware. Even Fox, cautious and combative, admitted on air that, if true, these playbook operations mark a deeply troubling pattern of institutional evasion. Then the message came, not from Twitter, not from a press call, but through Jasmine's office door. It arrived quietly just after 8 a.m., slipped under the crack like a whisper. An unmarked envelope, no return address, no stamps. Just one small USB drive sealed in a static-proof bag. Attached was a single sheet of paper. Printed in bold sans-serif font were 5 words. Check March 17th logs. They missed something. Jasmine didn't speak. She didn't reach for her coat. She didn't even call Brenda at first. She just stared at the line. Something about the bluntness, the way it wasn't trying to explain, only point. It didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a breadcrumb, dropped by someone who knew how the game was played. 10 minutes later, the USB sat inside a quarantine machine in a secured analysis room in the sub-basement of the Capitol's cyber division. Brenda stood beside her, arms crossed, face unreadable. 2 texts hovered over the monitor. Jasmine said only one thing. Don't open any files, just read the metadata. The scan began. Lines of code, strings of ID headers. Then, there it is, one of the texts said. This file was created March 17th at 1:06 a.m. UTC. That's the night after the last confirmed memo, Brenda whispered. That's when they should have been wiping everything. Jasmine nodded. They didn't wipe this. It wasn't a document. It was a log. A hidden cache of user access timestamps from a mirrored server Patel's team had tried to decommission. Buried deep within it were identifiers, not just for Patel, but for 2 names Jasmine hadn't seen before, and one that stopped her cold. R. Devlin. Brenda inhaled sharply. He came back after the hearing? No, Jasmine said, staring at the screen. He never left. The revelation dropped like a trap door beneath them. Devlin, the suspected architect of the entire communication shell, hadn't run. He'd buried deeper, and someone, somewhere, had known it, had left this behind, or maybe hadn't been able to delete it in time. The question wasn't just who W Staff Line was anymore. It was who else had their hands in the machine, and who was now scrambling to disappear. By noon, the leak was already in the hands of two investigative journalists, one from ProPublica, one from Der Spiegel. Both had independently confirmed the March 17th timestamp. Neither knew who had sent it to them. They only knew it was real. By 2 p.m., the Department of Justice quietly requested a federal injunction against public release of further classified technical materials tied to the hearing. That only made it worse. By 4 p.m., Echo Ren returned. This time, the message was posted to their new site, built with zero trackers, hosted in Iceland, distributed via onion links. A countdown clock pulsed above a single line of text. Tick, tock. W speaks in the 36 hours. Twitter went into meltdown. Reddit threads spiraled into hundreds of thousands of comments. Hacker collectives around the world began pooling what they knew. Anonymous cyber forensics teams started comparing logs, timestamps, internal architecture maps. But in Jasmine's office, things were quieter. Brenda was on the phone, securing additional clearance. Jasmine sat at her desk, staring at the monitor. The folder was still open, Devlin's name still glowing on the access log. She whispered to herself, barely a sound. They missed something. Not just a file, a man. And now the whole world was watching to see what else he left behind. The chamber confrontation was over. But the next part, the real part, was just beginning. Because now the story wasn't about what Patel had done. It was about what Devlin built, and whether anyone could stop it before it buried the truth again. Before the countdown hit zero, the world outside was already burning with questions. But inside the hearing chamber, Jasmine Crockett was about to drop something that didn't just answer them. It silenced them. The lights in the room didn't dim by design. They dimmed because no one moved. Not the press, not the aides, not the members of Congress. Jasmine stood behind the microphone, calm, composed, as if she'd rehearsed this moment not once, but 100 times in her mind. And perhaps she had. The folder was already open, the file already queued. All that was left was one sentence. "Mr. Chairman," she said with quiet finality, "with permission, I'd like to enter a short audio file into the record." The chairman, himself visibly rattled from the cascade of revelations earlier, gave a slow nod. "Proceed." Brenda stepped forward with a flash. Drive the size of a thumbnail. No labels. No markings. Just cold metal. She inserted it into the terminal, tapped twice, and then stepped back. A slight hum filled the chamber as the speakers warmed up. And then it began. The voice was unmistakable, confident, measured, chilling. Kash Patel. "You want to keep things clean? Don't write it down. If it might raise eyebrows, use Signal, not Outlook. If you're asked about it later, deny knowledge unless you're backed into a corner. Be vague. And for God's sake, don't document anything you wouldn't want read aloud in court." The reaction was instant, but silent, a collective intake of breath. One staffer in the corner instinctively covered her mouth. Another clutched the arm of the chair. The voice continued. "We don't leave trails. We use back channels for a reason. If something surfaces, put distance between yourself and the origination point. Encrypt everything. Distribute through burners. Never name names in writing." Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't need to explain. The words were doing it for her. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the clip ended. But the silence it left behind felt nuclear. The chairman leaned forward, voice cracking ever so slightly. "Mr. Patel, do you acknowledge this is your voice?" All eyes turned. Patel's hands rested flat on the desk. For once, they weren't moving. "Yes," he said, just one word, flat, resigned. The chairman continued. "Do you wish to retract or amend anything in that recording?" Patel shook his head slowly. "No." There it was, no legalese, no denial, no taken out of context. Just an admission, laid bare, raw as bone. And then, the moment no one could have predicted. A woman in the gallery stood, then a man near the rear press row. Then row by row, they rose, quietly, without prompting, without applause, a silent ovation. The rarest kind, the kind that doesn't celebrate victory, but marks a turning point. Even members of Congress stood. One elderly representative placed a hand over his heart. Another, a former prosecutor, simply closed her eyes and nodded. Jasmine didn't move. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just stood there, the truth humming in the air around her. She hadn't accused him. She hadn't attacked him. She had done something far more devastating. She had allowed him to convict himself. Brenda glanced toward her, eyes glassy, but said nothing. Because there was nothing left to say. The room was no longer a chamber. It was no longer even a hearing. It was a reckoning, delivered not by shouting or scandal, but by stillness. Patel, for all his years dancing through the inner sanctums of Washington, finally looked small, powerless, not because someone shouted him down, but because his own words had cornered him. He had spent a career perfecting the art of staying in the shadows. And now, under those fluorescent lights, there were no shadows left to hide in. Jasmine gathered her papers slowly, carefully, methodically, like someone sealing a case file for the last time. She didn't look at Patel. She didn't have to. He wasn't the center of the story anymore. The story had shifted. Now it was about the system that allowed him to operate this way for years. The silence of complicity, the coded language of plausible deniability, the weaponization of invisibility, all of it, now broken wide open. The cameras continued to roll, but no one was speaking. There were no dramatic exits, no gavel banging, no cable news sound bites. Just one woman, standing in the center of a storm she had quietly, meticulously, and surgically exposed, and then walked out of without ever raising her voice. By the time the room began to move again, aides packing up, members shuffling documents, reporters stumbling over each other to send drafts, the footage had already been clipped, posted, shared, watched millions of times. But what people remembered wasn't what was said, it was what wasn't. No defense, no rebuttal, no spin. Just one man caught on tape, and one woman who refused to let it stay buried. And in that moment, across the country, in classrooms and airports and break rooms and homes, people didn't just see a scandal, they saw accountability, unfiltered, undeniable, unstoppable. The silence after Patel's confession was deafening, but it was what followed in the days ahead that proved silence could also move mountains. He disappeared without a sound. No apology, no press tour, no last-minute rebuttal. The man who once knew how to turn scandal into airtime simply vanished. Kash Patel's name, once a constant fixture on political panels and primetime crawls, dissolved from the public square like vapor after rainfall. There was no official retreat, no confirmation of where he'd gone, just a short, sterile statement released through counsel. Mr. Patel has no further comment at this time. We trust the legal process will proceed accordingly. And that was it. No rebuttal, no deflection, just silence. For a figure who had built his legacy whispering into power's ear, who had known how to bend cameras and headlines to his will, that silence wasn't just absence, it was defeat. But while Patel receded, Jasmine Crockett was everywhere, without ever stepping forward. Her name topped every headline. Every anchor opened their hour with her face frozen in that moment. The steady gaze, the calm voice, the question that split the room open. You think no one checks? She received invitation after invitation. 60 Minutes, Meet the Press, The Daily Show, BBC's Hard Talk, offers to guest host political podcasts, keynote at Harvard Law, lead Sunday morning roundtables. Every network wanted her. Every showrunner scrambled to book her before the week was out. She turned them all down, not because she didn't have something to say, but because she had already said it. She didn't need to perform what had already been proven. One afternoon, as she left her district office in Dallas, a young reporter intercepted her on the steps. He didn't shout. He didn't ask about Patel. He simply asked, "Why haven't you spoken publicly?" Jasmine paused. For the first time all week, she looked tired. Not worn down, but heavy, as if carrying something she refused to set down. "I don't think I'm special," she said. "I just think, if I don't ask the question, then who will?" She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. That one line, quiet, unassuming, would travel further than any press tour ever could. It was stitched onto protest banners and scrawled in chalk on high school walls. It appeared on graduation stoles, in TikTok captions, on homemade buttons, and mugs and stickers handed out at law school info sessions. Students made it their Instagram bios. Public defenders printed it across office doorways. Civics teachers wrote it on whiteboards and left it there for weeks. Within days, a librarian at a state university commissioned a local artist to engrave it on the wall above the circulation desk. If I don't ask the question, then who will? It didn't trend because it was catchy. It spread because it reminded people of everything they'd once believed leadership could be, and how rarely they'd seen it. In the Capitol, some of her colleagues tried to reframe the moment as political strategy. A few sought to absorb it, issue their own statements about transparency, hint at long-standing suspicions. Jasmine ignored them. She returned to the committee floor, sat through budget hearings, reviewed infrastructure allocations. She kept her head down, voted, listened, showed up to the food pantry on Saturday like she always did. She didn't chase the fire, because she had already walked through it. Meanwhile, the internet churned forward, and I Ask the Question became a movement, a campaign, a quiet revolution. Videos emerged of survivors, whistleblowers, teachers, medics, veterans, telling their stories, ending each one with, "If I don't ask the question, then who will?" Artists reimagined Jasmine's moment in mural form. One painted her silhouette into the side of a Philadelphia library. In Oregon, a youth coalition launched a digital archive to preserve every record, file, and minute from the Patel hearing. Professors cited it in classes on democratic resilience. High schoolers debated it in mock trials. And through it all, Jasmine said nothing more. The silence wasn't absence, it was purpose. But the world wasn't done speaking to her. 6 days after the hearing, she arrived at her office before sunrise. The halls were quiet. Security waved her through without words. She brewed her own coffee that morning. No aid yet, no calls scheduled. She liked the quiet. It reminded her of before, when the work was still just paperwork, when no one cared what she said. Her inbox blinked with unread emails. Most marked for staff review, press summaries, committee briefings, one from a constituent about water service in East Oak Cliff. She was halfway through typing a reply when she saw it. An unnamed sender. No metadata trace, no subject header, just 5 words in the preview window. "We were never all on board." She clicked. The message body was brief, no sign-off, no signature block, just 2 lines. "I was part of it. I'm ready to talk. Devlin." She stared at it, not because she was surprised, but because something inside her had always known this was coming. Devlin, the ghost in the system, the rumored architect of the back-channel network, the name no one had dared say too loudly on record, had finally spoken. Not to the press, not to the DOJ, to her. Jasmine closed her laptop. She didn't move, didn't exhale. She simply sat there, her coffee growing cold beside her, the morning sun beginning to spill across her desk, and said, very quietly, to no one in particular, "Then we begin again." The email from Devlin changed everything. But as Jasmine sat in the quiet stillness of her office, she realized the story was no longer about him, or Patel, or even the system. It was about something deeper, older, and far more fragile. It was about trust, not the trust in governments or committees or laws written in polite font on letterhead, but the kind of trust people carry silently, the belief that somewhere, someone is watching the watchers. That the truth, buried though it may be, still wants to be found. That no matter how carefully power protects itself, someone will eventually stand and say, "Enough." Jasmine hadn't planned to be that someone. She hadn't chased the headlines or calculated the strategy. She wasn't the loudest, richest, or most connected voice in the room. And that was the point. She didn't rise because she wanted to be the center of the storm. She rose because she refused to look away from it. And in doing so, she reminded a country that had grown tired, cynical, and numb, that one person, armed only with facts, discipline, and moral clarity, could still tilt the ground beneath the powerful. But it wasn't just about courage. It was about pressure. The pressure of holding the line when no one else will. The weight of silence when every instinct screams to speak. The injustice of being told again and again to wait your turn, while watching men like Patel skip the line with sealed folders and encrypted exits. Jasmine faced a machine, a system that didn't just permit secrecy, it required it. That trained insiders how to disappear without leaving footprints, how to frame every sin as protocol and every cover-up as strategic discretion. And she didn't dismantle it with rage. She did it with restraint. While the world shouted, she documented. While others speculated, she verified. While power hid behind procedure, she put facts on the table and let them speak. Slowly, clearly, devastatingly. Because the lesson wasn't that injustice screams. It was that injustice whispers, and someone has to hear it. She heard it in late-night file discrepancies, in aides who looked down when asked about server logs, in the paper trail that was never meant to be followed. But the deeper lesson, the one that settled into the hearts of millions who watched her stand before that committee, was not about Patel or memos or surveillance. It was about what happens when institutions forget they are made of people. And people forget they have the right to ask questions. In every city, in every school, in every kitchen table, conversations sparked by the story, the question wasn't what will happen next. It was, what would I have done? Would I have ignored the missing file? Would I have backed down when the doors closed? Would I have chosen silence because it was safer? Or would I have asked the question? The human cost of Jasmine's journey wasn't measured in threats or exhaustion, though there had been plenty of both. It was measured in the ache of knowing she had stepped forward not because it was her job, but because everyone else had stepped back. And yet she never claimed moral superiority. She didn't paint herself as a martyr, because she knew what mattered wasn't that she had been brave. It was that others saw her bravery and remembered their own. That's what makes a democracy breathe. Not the rules, not the votes, not even the laws, but the willingness of ordinary people to hold the powerful accountable and to hold themselves accountable to the truth, even when it costs something, especially then. Jasmine reminded the nation that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's asking the question anyway. And in that courtroom, when she played the recording, when she read the metadata, when she spoke the name Devlin before the world was ready to hear it, she wasn't just confronting a man, she was confronting a culture that says, don't ask, don't look too hard, don't make noise, don't ruin your career. She ruined nothing. She rebuilt something. She reminded people what real integrity looks like. Not polished, not packaged, but patient, persistent, and painfully human. And that's why the story lived beyond the headlines, beyond the hearing, beyond Patel's silence. Because in the quiet afterward, something incredible happened. People looked inward. A teacher in Detroit rewrote her government curriculum, adding a unit called the Ethics of Questions. A single mother in Tulsa started attending city council meetings, asking why storm drain repairs were 6 years overdue. A teenage coder in San Jose built a public database of political donations connected to encrypted lobbying groups. None of them knew Jasmine, but all of them heard her, because the story wasn't just about exposing a lie. It was about reminding people they were allowed to speak, that their voice mattered not because of titles, but because of truth. And if they didn't ask the question, then who would? The truth was no longer hidden. The players had been exposed. But Jasmine knew. The real question wasn't whether justice had begun. It was whether the people watching would be brave enough to finish it. This was never meant to be a closed chapter. Not a headline, not a clip, not a hearing with clean boundaries and ceremonial endings. This was an alarm, ringing, relentless, impossible to sleep through. And now that the noise had pierced the walls, Jasmine knew her job was done. But the mission was not, because the power to change this story no longer sat in a courtroom. It didn't wear a nameplate. It didn't wait for subpoenas. It now lived in the hands of the people who had watched everything unfold and asked themselves, what am I supposed to do with this? The answer is simple. You act. Because what Jasmine uncovered wasn't a single man's mistake. It was a system of avoidance. A culture built not on laws, but on loopholes, on encrypted whispers, on the quiet comfort of plausible deniability. The machine didn't malfunction. It functioned perfectly, and that should terrify us, but also ignite us. Because if a machine was built to conceal, it can be dismantled to reveal. Not by a hero, not by one hearing, but by many small refusals, by 100 quiet stands, by people you've never heard of deciding that that's how it's always been done is no longer a good enough reason to keep doing it. That's where you come in. This is not a moment to admire courage. This is a moment to inherit it. Because Jasmine didn't dismantle corruption with fury. She did it with stillness, with preparation, with patience, with the kind of relentless care that makes cowards sweat and liars stumble. She wasn't dramatic. She was disciplined, and discipline, that's something we can all practice. It starts in the places no camera sees. In staff meetings where someone says, "Don't put that in writing." In inboxes where a memo suddenly disappears. In boardrooms where silence is cheaper than honesty. In police stations. In campaign war rooms. In real estate zoning offices. In school boards and tech labs and accounting departments. You don't need clearance to ask a question. You need conscience. That's what Jasmine wielded like a blade. And what this system never planned for. Because they're not afraid of outrage. They're afraid of clarity. Of the person who walks in quietly and refuses to play dumb. Of the citizen who reads the policy manual and asks where the funding went. Of the intern who backs up the server before it's wiped. Of the whistleblower who doesn't want a book deal. Just justice. And yes, it's risky. Asking questions is dangerous, but not asking them is fatal. That's what this story taught us. That we don't lose our republic in fire. We lose it in fog. We lose it to normalization, to fatigue, to people who feel the weight of something wrong and convince themselves that someone else will fix it. Jasmine didn't believe that. She didn't think she was the most qualified person to challenge a federal official. She simply looked around, saw no one else moving, and stepped forward anyway. And in doing so, she reminded us that democracy isn't a place we live in. It's a decision we make every single day to pay attention, to push back, to press record, to print the receipt, to stay in the room when others leave it. And that is the call before us now. Not to celebrate a woman, but to mirror her, to make "who will ask the question" not a rhetorical line on a viral clip, but a challenge we take personally. Because the story didn't end with a vote. It began with a choice. And now the choice belongs to you. You, reading this, don't need a title. You don't need a microphone. You need resolve. You need a refusal to let rot settle quietly under the floorboards of the institutions you pay for, serve in, and depend on. You need to decide that watching injustice unfold without interruption is no longer an option. This country does not need more outrage. It needs more action. It needs civic courage. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.